So building upon prior work is essentially, I've done something in the past. In this specific instance, what was prior work? Prior work was the first histogram. A. So this was data. This was the first histogram. This was prior work. I did this from here. From A, I went to a revised bin, and then from a revised bin, I went to B. Right. So prior work is often based on your understanding that your first pass, your second pass, your third pass may just be used to better understand what you're trying to do. And then your final presentation, your final work, your final analysis would most likely be your fourth or fifth pass on the same data set. So it's not enough to do the work once, you may actually have to do work multiple times. And each time your understanding of the underlying data set, your understanding of the expectation, the user mindset, the user expectation, your understanding of what constitutes actionable intelligence is going to change. Another variation, so if you remember the State Bank data set, in the State Bank data set, you've got two choices. One choice is that you can use direct data, which is what State Bank does. So if you think in terms of the State Bank payment system report, what are they getting? They're getting direct data from where? They're getting direct data from the banking industry in Pakistan. And so the banks that actually have an IPG, and an IPG is what? An IPG is an internet payment gateway. These transactions that are occurring on the IPG represent direct data. And they use this direct data to do what? They get a sense of what is the size of the market that represents digital payments in Pakistan. How many of these payments are done through cards? What does this say about consumer spending, about affordability, about purchasing power, about discretionary income in Pakistan? That's the first part. But there's an alternate estimation model, and that model is, how do we reconcile the information we see here with indirect data? And the indirect data is, what is the size of our GDP? What is the size of the retail market in that GDP? How fast is that market growing? And then how does that growth compare with the growth that we see here? And then we can use this to not just corroborate the information we see, we also reconcile. What are we seeing? And what we're seeing, the information that we're seeing, is that information accurate? Is that relevant? Is there a chance that we're missing something either here or here? So there's a feedback loop between the direct data model and the indirect data model, right? This is also an instance of prior work. Where does this prior work comes from? This comes from, a 200-year history of studying macroeconomics, not just in the developed world, but also in the developing world. So two variations. We use this, we use plot A to build a better plot B, prior work. We can use prior work, prior history, prior data, prior documentation, prior relationships that exist between retail markets and GDP, and use that to estimate whether our direct data estimation is correct, whether it's capturing the entire market, or is it missing out on at least some part, some share of that market within the context of e-commerce vendors and e-commerce markets in Pakistan. Third, so we've done two pieces. The third piece, the third rule is that there are generally multiple paths to the same answer and to the same number. In this specific instance, if you remember the FTC store, the financetradingcourse.com store, one model for getting a sense of my sales projection for the year is that I look at how are sales generated. So in my instance, in the case of, and not just my instance, in the case of any other online store, e-commerce store that sells products online, we start with content. So I have a page out there, and that page pops up when somebody searches for a keyword. When that page pops up, that counts as an impression. If the impression that I've presented to a potential eligible customer is relevant enough, they would click on the link. So for example, right now, if you do a search for ITC IBA lectures, just do a Google search for ITC IBA lectures, something's going to pop up. You'll only click on that something if it's relevant. If it's not relevant, you would not click on it. Let's assume that your quiz is going to be on, let's say I say histograms. So if you do a search on making histograms in Excel, and you do that search in Google, something's going to pop up. Google's going to give you a set of search results. When you take a look at the search results, the result that is the most relevant, the most useful, the most appropriate is the result they're going to click on, right? And that click is essentially traffic. That click counts as traffic on a website. But the conversion rate, the rate that takes the number of impressions, so if you take the number of clicks and you divide that by the impressions here, you get what's called a click-through rate, or CTR. Now, the click that comes to the site, so for example, histograms in Excel, and let's say the histogram in Excel says, okay, please give me your email address and I will send you this thing as a free PDF guide that shows you how to build histograms in Excel. Or you do a search on ITC IBA and it says, oh, here's a channel of video lectures on the ITC course at IBA Karachi. Click on that video and you watch the first video. That counts as a conversion. And then conversions lead to orders, and orders have a ticket size, as you saw in our case above, and then orders into ticket size gives you revenues. So this is what? This is a model for sales growth. Now, how can you grow sales? Remember, there are multiple answers to the same, multiple paths to the same answer. One way of growing sales is to add more content. And as you add more content, you will get more impressions. And as you add more impressions, this whole funnel will work better and you'll have higher revenues. This is one part. Another way of adding sales is to focus on your click-through rate. So let's say my click-through rate right now is 2%. And I increase that and improve that to 5%. So now what happens? This additional 3% of click-through means what? I get higher clicks. And as I get higher clicks, what happens? As I get higher clicks, this whole cycle improves. And I again get to higher revenues. What else can I do to improve my click-through rates? In this specific instance, I can also improve my conversion rate. My conversion rate that takes these clicks and leads to higher orders. So if I have a higher conversion rate, I get more orders, and more orders lead to higher revenue, and this becomes my third possible path to increasing sales. I have a fourth path of increasing sales, and that fourth path is, what color should I pick now? I think we've used violet, blue. Let's take maroon, right? My fourth path is I can just focus on increasing the ticket size. And when I increase the ticket size, what happens? Orders remain the same, click-through remain the same, conversion remain the same, impression remain the same, content remain the same, but my revenues go higher, and this becomes my fourth choice. So one model of increasing sales, two models for increasing sales, three models for increasing sales, four models for increasing sales. There are four different paths that we can use to increase sales across the board. So there are multiple paths to the same answers. Figure out which is the path that works best for you. Purpose before presentation refers to the why question. Why are we doing this? Why are you performing this analysis? What is the intent? What is the objective of performing this analysis? And my favorite example, I think over the last 15 days, I've lost count of the number of people who asked me, why did we do Scrabble? Why did we pick Scrabble? Could you not find any other game? Why did it have to be Scrabble? Why did it have to be a game? What do you think was the intent? What was the purpose? What was the objective? The purpose was very simple. The purpose was that of the games that we have, that we play with, that we work with, we find that Scrabble is a much deeper game. That the level of complexity that Scrabble has, given the fact that it's essentially chess with word, it has multiple layers and dimensions of complexity. And if your objective is to teach people about how wide, how diverse, how sharp problem spaces grow, if your objective is to teach them how to search for solutions across those problem spaces, Scrabble is a great game to use as illustration. You would be surprised if you think in terms of the top ranked computer science universities in the world that teach computer science, that teach theory of computing or computational thinking or computational thought, whether it's Carnegie Mellon or whether it's MIT, you will find that some of them are also using Scrabble. So it's not just us at IBA who want to use Scrabble to help you to think through the challenges of computational thinking. Other schools are doing the same thing. That's the intent, that's the purpose, that's the objective. So purpose before presentation. Purpose before presentation is important because if you understand why, then the nature and the focus of your analysis could be a lot more directed. So we've spent a fair bit of time on setting the ground rules, but now I want to come to the heart of our conversation. And the heart of our conversation is the difference between intelligence, insights, and metrics. When it comes to data, what is the difference between intelligence, insights, and metrics? How do we differentiate between these three categories, these three definitions, and why is it important? So from the FTC sales data set, we have a fact, a factoid, a data element, and that fact is 58% of all orders represent 63% of all revenues. So let's call this, let's look at choices. So A, is this data? B, is this a metric? C, is this an insight? And D, is this intelligence? And E, my favorite, is this actionable intelligence? So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 choices. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 choices. 58% of all orders represent 63% of all revenues. Wellness check. Again, I want to get a sense of if you're paying attention, I want a sense of whether you are following what we've been doing so far. What do you think this represents? 58% of all orders is equal to 63% of all revenues. Is this data? Is this metric? Is this insight? Is this intelligence? Or is this actionable intelligence? Pick a choice, A, B, C, D, and E, and present your choice in the chat. You have 30 seconds. The question is, if you read this piece, 58% of all orders represent 63% of all revenue. What does this represent? Is it data? Is it metric? Is it insight? Is it intelligence, or is it actionable intelligence? That's the question. That's the question you have to answer. And I have, let me see how many votes. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 5 लोगों ने अभी भी वोट नहीं दिया है. These are the type of questions you should expect in the quiz. So if you can't handle them right now, you should think carefully about. I would actually recommend that you go through the recording once the recording is uploaded and go through this once again. So now, question, is it data? Data is generally raw, right? So you know that snapshot that we had of all the orders listed one by one, that was raw unprocessed data. This is clearly not raw unprocessed data. This is processed data. How did we know? Yeah, there you go. Thank you very much, Isha. You're on the money exactly. So this is not true. So if I pick my choices, let me change the pen. Let's just do this. So this is clearly not the right choice. It's not data. Is it actionable intelligence? Can you act on it? 58% of all orders represent 63% of all revenues. Is this actionable intelligence? It's not. It's clearly not actionable. You can't act on it, right? As in, what would you do? How would you act on it? You need more. You need a lot more for you to figure out how to sort of take the information that's presented here and put this to work. Is it intelligence? You're not sure. Is it insight? Not sure. It's clearly a metric. It's sort of presenting information that deals with your operational performance. It's a metric that tracks, okay, what is happening. You can use it to figure out whether it's in alignment with the milestones that you want to hit or aim for. You can make the case, if you really want to, that it is possibly insight. So there is, you can, if you were to sort of push for it, I would say it's somewhere between metric and insight. Metric certainly, insight maybe, but that depends on your definition of what insight is. And since we haven't defined what an insight is, I'm going to leave this open right now. So I won't hold this against you. But it's not intelligence. It's not at the level of intelligence, and it's certainly not actionable. So your correct choices were essentially maybe B, certainly B, but also possibly C. So now when I say 58% of all orders represent 63% of all revenues, how can that help us? One of the insights, now, and this is where it gets interesting, when you talk about insight, the insight here is that all orders, this is a metric, the metric generates the insight that all orders are clearly not equal. Because if they were equal in value, 58% of orders would generate 58% of all revenues. But in this specific instance, 58% of orders are generating more than their share of revenues, which tells us that all orders are not equal. Some orders are more equal than other orders. That makes sense? How did we get there? We got there from these two numbers. 58% of all orders are equal to represent 63% of all revenues. Can we dig into the analysis to see if we can sort of support this information? Yes, we can. So if you see this deck, this is a deck that shows, that indicates, that shares where do the orders come from. So 423 orders of 768 that were picked up for this analysis had $67,000 in value. And then 99 orders represent about $11,000. This is by country, right? So this is how many orders we got from the US? 423. How many we got from the UK? 99. 75 orders from India were, the number of orders was less, but almost the same value as UK. So I would actually indicate that the average order value, the AOV for India, is clearly higher than UK. And then Singapore, this is really nice. Singapore is 43 orders and roughly the same value as India and roughly the same value as UK. So Singapore with 43 orders has essentially, I would say, about 2x the AOV of orders that were generated from UK. And then 39 orders from Canada were about $4,500. 35 orders from France were about $4,000. 54 orders from UAE, from the United Arab Emirates, were worth about $3,000. And in total, this generated about $11,000 in sale. $111,000 in sales over about 12 or 13 year period. So we started with this metric, which was 58% of all orders represent 63% of all revenue. And that metric gave us the insight, and that insight was all orders are not equal. Some orders are more equal than others, which then led us to this analysis by country that clearly shows that there are certain countries where the AOV is higher. So a natural next step for this analysis, for this calculation for us on our part, would be, can we go out and do a simple calculation that will help us figure out what the order share looks like. And now we see the same information. But we see it broken down by country. So the US has 31%. A third of all paid orders come from the US, but they represent 40% of value. Singapore has 3% of all orders, but represents 6%. So almost 2x the share of orders. 2x the share of orders in terms of value. The UK has 7.5% of orders, but less share. India has 5.6 and slightly higher share. So, this sort of gives you a sense that average order value across India, all orders in India is sort of similar. Here, average order value is possibly going to be higher. Here also, it's going to be higher. Then Canada is about 2.9, 2.6, France is about 2.6, 2.4, UAE is about 4.1, 1.8. This clearly indicates that orders from UAE will most likely have the lowest of average order value. I hope you can see the path, right? The path is, what are we doing? We are tracing our path from metric to insight to intelligence. So then our next slide basically shows us AOV. And now you can see, and as we expected and anticipated, the AOV, the average order value for Singapore is about $238, which is roughly about 2x the size of AOV from UK. So if you see this, if you're the store owner and you see this, which country, which city would you want to focus your sales effort on? You got 4 choices, right? You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. You got the US, UK, India, Singapore, Canada, France, and UAE. You got 4 choices. Which country would you focus your sales effort on? If you want to grow sales, if the objective, if the why, if the purpose, the intent of this analysis is to grow sales, which country would you focus your sales effort on? Rank them. So pick the top 3 countries out of this that you would focus your sales effort on. And then rank them. So the US is number 1, and the UK is number 2, India is number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's say you want to say, I want to focus on UAE, France, and Canada in that order, then your answer would be 7, 6, 5. If you want to focus on Canada, France, and UAE, your answer would be 5, 6, and 7. So pick the 3 countries that you would focus your sales effort on, and then rank them, and then post your answer in the chat. Your preference is clearly determined and driven. 413, Bilal says 413, Ahmed says 413, Samat Taslim says 134. Your preference is clearly driven, so there are multiple drivers of preference, right? One driver of preference would simply be, I want to focus on total value. So by value, the largest market is obviously the US. So if you picked US as a market, that's not a bad choice. And the AOV also, the US average order value is also reasonably high. So both in terms of AOV and value, the US makes a lot of sense. If you're just focusing on AOV, then Singapore makes the most sense. So certainly Singapore needs to be on that list. So 1, that's the first part, select a country, so 1, and then 4, so that's 2. And then if you think in terms of average order value, then the third highest average order value is in India, which is 75 and 10,267 with 137. So 1, 4, and 3. So 1, 4, and 3 are the preferred choices, but how would you rank them? Which market? So for example, let's say I want to run a Google ad campaign and I have limited amount of marketing dollars. Where should I focus my Google ad campaign on? Which country should I focus my Google ad campaign on? I want to run it on one market and one market alone. That's all the money I have. And the choices I have are 1, 4, and 3. So I have 1, 4, and 3. So 1, 4, and 3 is the US, India, and Singapore. Which order would I do that in? And if let's say your average order value is 238 and let's say your cost per click on Google for an ad campaign that sells these specific products is $1, then Singapore makes a lot of sense. Because you'd spend $1 and let's say you spend $100 in total, and let's say your conversion is, so you spend $1, it's about $100. $100 gets you about 100 clicks, 100 relevant clicks. Of those 100 relevant clicks, let's assume your conversion rate is about 4%, so you get 4 orders. So you spend 100, you get 4 orders, average order value is $200. So that's about $800. Spend 100, get 800 back. For Singapore, the math makes a lot of sense. So from a ad spending perspective, I would spend money on Singapore. And in that sense, my preference would become 4, 1, and 3. India, you could possibly run an ad campaign, but I'm not sure how it would be perceived and received and how it would convert. I don't have data, but I do have data on both Singapore and the US. So my take would be, it'll be essentially 4, 1, and then 3. So 413 would be my preferred choice. Your preferred choice could obviously be different depending on what was the nature, the basis, the focus of your attention. You have followed the path from, you started off with raw data. You started off with raw data. Your raw data was essentially a list of orders. Then what did you do? Then you parse them and you process them and you analyze them, and you got to a point where you had this metric that says that average, what's the average order size? And you said, what's the average order value by country? And this got you to a table where you had a sense of what the AOV was, and then you use that to do what? You use that to pick a market. For what? You wanted to pick a market to run a Google ad campaign for your products. And what is this? This is an action. Hence the term actionable intelligence. I can act on this information. Hence the term actionable intelligence. This term tells me, based on the information that I have, that I should focus on Singapore for running an ad campaign, because the math suggests that I would basically get 8x return on my investment if I can get to a 4% conversion rate. And if I even get to a 2% conversion rate, then I would still get a 4x return. I'll spend $100 and I'll get how much back? I'll get about $400. So my cost would be about $100 and I'd make about $300 in about net revenue. Okay, makes sense? From data to actionable intelligence. That's the path. That's the path that you want to follow. Now you can perform the same analysis by city. And when I say city, Singapore is both a city and counts as a country. So Singapore still tops the list, but you can perform the analysis by city, which basically sets that the top cities in terms of AOV are Singapore and Mumbai and, ooh, surprise, surprise, Denver. Even Riyadh isn't that bad. So I've got about 33 orders with an average AOV of about $290 from Singapore, and I have about 16 orders with an average value of about $290 from Mumbai. So if you want to drill down your ad campaign at a city level, here's another list of metrics that you can use to decide and select which markets do you want to focus on. You can also slice and dice it by the nature and type of customers. How many customers are new? How many customers are returning? What is the share of revenue and orders of new customers and returning customers? And then what is the average AOV, average order value of new customers and returning customers? These are again different cuts that are focusing on answering different questions. Earlier on, when we started here, at this point in time, my focus was I want to run an ad campaign. I want to see which markets to focus on. Here, I want to run an ad campaign by city. So my intent, my nature, my purpose, the question I'm asking changed. Here the question was, which markets at a national level, at a country level should I focus on? Here the question is, which city should I focus on? And given the nature of the question, the nature of the intent or purpose, remember purpose before presentation? Given the nature of our purpose, we want this analysis done on a city basis. This is a different question. This is a different question. Should I focus on new customers or returning customers? When I advertise, when I run a campaign, should I focus on new customers or returning customers? There's a term that you should look up when it comes to the ad world. It's called remarketing. So should I, is it any sense in enabling remarketing to see whether remarketing would help me drive better numbers, higher sales growth? And then here it's again, does it make sense for me to focus on returning customers? Do returning customers really have higher order value? So in the US, no. In the US, they are in a similar range. But in India, yes. In India, it makes a lot of sense. In Singapore also, yes. So in India and Singapore, returning customers have higher order value. But in the US, no. In the US and UK, it doesn't make sense to focus on returning customers. In India and Singapore, it makes a lot of focus. UAE also makes a lot of focus. Saudi Arabia is the other way around. New customers buy more, returning customers buy less. But at the same time, you also have to think in terms of what is the share, what is the percentage, what is the size of the pool of the orders you're using to calculate these averages. So my suspicion, and I think we saw this earlier, Saudi Arabia and UAE, the pool is very small, so this may not be a credible insight, as in the pool of orders that we are using to generate this recommendation is not large enough to be credible from a statistical point of view. But for India and for Singapore, yes, it makes sense. In India, Singapore, and the US, I think the data is big enough for us to make the recommendation using the numbers that we're seeing in front of us. So quick summary in terms of what is it that we've covered. So remember, where did this start? This specific section of the class started with the difference between metrics, insight, and intelligence. What is the difference between metric, insights, and intelligence? Data is raw, generally unprocessed. And if it's raw and unprocessed, the best example that we have, that we've seen so far, is order value. Metric is processed data, and it generally tracks something that you can use to measure the direction or the focus of your analysis. So in this specific case, it's average order value. So and we're now talking specifically about the context of the FTC data set. Data is order value. Metric is average order value. Insight in this specific instance, multiple insights, but one insight that I want to focus on is traffic without a product. So if I look at the traffic data, if I look at the sales data, I see that there is a lot of traffic that's focusing on one specific domain. For example, for us, that domain was financial modeling. So we had pages that were attracting a lot of traffic, and these are all pages that were devoted and dedicated to financial modeling, but we did not have a product for financial modeling. So the insight was that, okay, use this data because you already have steady demand. Use this data to build a product that does financial modeling, and then try and sell that product on the financial modeling side, right? So that was the insight. In our case, the example that we've just gone through, the example that we've looked at, what's the insight? The insight was that Singapore has average AOV, and what was the actionable intelligence that came out of that average AOV? If I want to run a Google ad campaign, then Singapore should be my top market. It should be my top market because my cost per click, my CPC, in running a Google ad campaign is going to be, let's say, about $2. And if it's going to be about $2 and I run and focus on getting 100 clicks, that's spend $200. If I spend these $200, what do I get in return? I get an average order value of $240 into 2, so I make about, if I make $480 in revenue, so if I spend $200, what do I get? If I spend $200, I get $240 in average AOV times 2, which gives me $480 in revenue. So I spend $200, I make $480, my net is about $280 in my pocket. This was what? For us, this was actionable intelligence. So the insight was that the average AOV for Singapore is higher. The intelligence, the actionable intelligence, was that we can use that to run a campaign on Singapore that would generate and convert at a higher rate compared to other markets, both in terms of sales as well as conversions. So data, metric, insight, and intelligence.